In the harsh borderlands of West Texas, where the sun beats down mercilessly and drought carves deep scars into the red earth, there exists a story that has echoed through the desert towns for more than a century. A tale of courage, greed, faith, and secrets buried in time. Prepare yourself to discover the mysteries of the haunted house at White Rock Ranch. It was the year 1897. Samuel Theodore Whitman, one of the most prosperous ranchers in the region around San Antonio, owned lands that stretched for miles, countless herds of longhorn cattle, and a reputation that extended far beyond the Texas border. But there was something that tainted his fortune and his peace, an old adobe house built in the early days of his property, which had become uninhabitable due to the supernatural manifestations that occurred there. The structure, erected by the first ranch hands with their own hands, had thick walls of sun-dried brick, ceramic tiles fired in the local kiln, and small windows that seemed like ever-watchful eyes. For years, it had served as housing for the ranch foreman and his family. But everything changed on a stormy June night when the first signs of the supernatural began to manifest. Jacob Miller, the foreman, was the first to report the strange occurrences. A man of faith, known for his honesty, Jacob told that during the early morning hours he heard heavy footsteps traversing the rooms of the house. They weren't the light steps of his wife, Mary Grace, nor the bare feet of his 3 young children. They were firm, determined footfalls, as if someone was searching for something specific. Initially, Jacob attributed the noises to the strong winds that blew through the cracks in the construction. But he soon realized that the sounds occurred even on the calmest nights, when not even a tumbleweed moved in the yard. The footsteps seemed to follow always the same path. They began in the back room, traveled down the central hallway, stopped in the main parlor, and then headed to the kitchen, where they ceased abruptly. Mary Grace, a brave woman who had faced droughts, raids by bandits, and diseases that decimated the cattle, began to show signs of nervousness she had never displayed before. Her nights of sleep were replaced by anguished vigils, ears alert to every sound, eyes fixed on the wooden ceiling that creaked without apparent reason. The couple's children, aged 5, 8, and 10, began having recurring nightmares. The youngest, little Pete, would wake up screaming, talking about a tall, thin man who stood in the corner of the room, watching him in silence. The middle daughter, Frances, refused to play alone in the yard, claiming that someone called her name from inside the house, even when all the family members were working in the fields. Johnny, the oldest, began displaying peculiar behavior. During the day, he appeared agitated and spoke about buried treasures, about men who came at night looking for something they had lost. His words were confused for a 10-year-old child, as if he were repeating information he had received from some external source. The situation worsened when objects began to disappear and reappear in unusual places. Clay pots vanished from the kitchen and were found buried in the backyard. Clothes disappeared from the clothesline and appeared carefully folded on the parlor table. Mary Grace's rosary, inherited from her grandmother, was buried beneath the mesquite tree that grew beside the house at a depth that would have required hours of excavation. But the episode that definitively convinced Jacob Miller that something supernatural inhabited the house occurred on an August dawn. He awoke to the sound of furniture being dragged in the main parlor. He grabbed his kerosene lantern and, armed with courage and his old Winchester rifle, went to investigate what was happening. Upon reaching the parlor, he found all the furniture piled in the center of the room, forming a perfect pyramid that nearly reached the ceiling. The heavy oak table was at the top, balanced impossibly on chairs and stools.
But what was most disturbing was that everything had been done in absolute silence, as Jacob had been awake for only a few minutes and had heard no noise beyond the initial dragging. When he tried to dismantle the furniture pyramid, an invisible force pushed him violently against the wall. Jacob, a robust man accustomed to heavy work, was thrown as if he were a dry leaf. His Winchester discharged accidentally, making a hole in the ceiling and waking the entire family. Mary Grace found her husband on the floor, conscious but visibly shaken. The furniture remained piled up, but now emitted a low, constant sound, as if it were vibrating on its own. The children cried in terror, clinging to their mother, while Jacob tried to find a logical explanation for the impossible. The next morning, Jacob Miller sought out Samuel Theodore Whitman and reported all the events. The rancher, a pragmatic man, not given to superstitions, initially showed skepticism, but the seriousness and evident emotional disturbance of his trusted foreman made him reflect on the situation. Samuel decided to spend a night in the haunted house to personally verify the truth of the reports. Accompanied by 2 armed cowhands and equipped with lanterns, he established a vigil in the main parlor. During the first hours of the night, nothing happened. The men even relaxed, commenting among themselves that perhaps Jacob Miller was imagining things due to excessive work and worry. But when the church bell in San Antonio struck midnight, the temperature inside the house plummeted dramatically. The air became dense, heavy, almost tangible. The lantern's flames began to flicker without any air current, casting dancing shadows on the adobe walls. It was then that they heard the footsteps. They weren't the vague noises described by Jacob Miller, but clear, defined steps that seemed to be produced by leather boots on the packed girth floor. The steps came from the back of the house, slowly approaching the location where the 3 men waited. Samuel and his companions remained motionless, watching the corridor that led to the bedrooms. They could hear each footstep perfectly, but saw nothing, as if an invisible person walked determinedly towards them. When the steps reached the entrance to the parlor, they stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was even more disturbing than the noises. The 3 men remained motionless, barely daring to breathe, waiting for the next movement of the invisible presence. Suddenly, one of the lanterns extinguished itself. Then the second. The third began to dim its flame gradually until the parlor was plunged into total darkness. It was then that they heard a voice. It wasn't exactly a human voice, but something that resembled whispered words coming from very far away. The words were incomprehensible, seemed to be in some unknown language, but carried an intense emotional charge of anguish and desperation. One of the cowhands, a brave man who had already faced mountain lions and bandits, ran screaming from the house. The other tried to relight his lantern with trembling hands, but the flame extinguished repeatedly, as if something was blowing on it. Samuel, demonstrating the firmness that had made him respected throughout the region, remained on the spot. He spoke aloud, asking what the presence desired, if there was something that could be done to give it peace. The response came in the form of an icy wind that swept through the entire house, making the doors slam violently and the windows open and close repeatedly. When the first ray of sun touched the house walls, everything returned to normal. The lanterns could be lit again, the temperature returned to the region's standard, and silence descended upon the structure. But Samuel was convinced that something supernatural inhabited that house. From that day on, the house was abandoned. Jacob Miller and his family moved to another building on the ranch, and no one else dared spend a night in the place. The house began to deteriorate rapidly, as if nature itself conspired to accelerate its destruction. But Samuel was not a man to give up easily. The house represented a considerable investment, and mainly a challenge to his authority as master of those lands. He decided he would find a way to solve the problem, whatever the cost.
She arrived at the ranch on a September afternoon, bringing with her a chest full of herbs, candles, holy water, and various amulets. She spent the day preparing for the spiritual confrontation, blessing the entire house with sage branches, sprinkling coarse salt in the corners, and lighting special candles at strategic points. At nightfall, Grandmother Esperanza entered the house alone, carrying only her rosary and a small wooden cross. Samuel and several ranch residents waited outside, anxious to see the result of her intervention. During the first hours, nothing happened. The house remained silent, illuminated only by the candles that Grandmother Esperanza had lit. But around 2 in the morning, the observers began to hear a conversation inside the structure. Grandmother Esperanza spoke loudly, as if dialoguing with someone. Her words were clear, but the responses she received were inaudible to those outside. The curandera seemed to be negotiating something, trying to convince the presence to abandon the place. The conversation extended for more than an hour, with moments of greater agitation interspersed with periods of apparent calm. At one point, they heard Grandmother Esperanza shout something about justice and reparation, as if she were arguing with someone particularly stubborn. When the sun rose, Grandmother Esperanza emerged from the house, staggering, visibly exhausted. Her clothes were dirty with earth, as if she had fallen or dragged herself across the floor. Her hair, always impeccably arranged, was disheveled, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. "This spirit ain't like the others," she told Samuel, her voice hoarse from talking all night long. "He don't want to leave 'cause he's got unfinished business. There's something that needs to be found, something that was taken from him when he was alive. Until that gets resolved, he'll keep haunting this place." Grandmother Esperanza refused to try again. She said the presence was too powerful and that her interference might make the situation even worse. She warned Samuel that only someone with very specific faith, protected by particular saints, would have a chance to solve the problem definitively. The news of Grandmother Esperanza's failure spread quickly throughout the region. If the most respected curandera in Texas couldn't solve the problem, who else could? The house gained the reputation for being truly impossible to exorcise, and many began to see it as a place cursed forever. But Samuel didn't give up. On the contrary, he saw in the situation an opportunity to attract people with exceptional abilities. He decided to offer a substantial reward to whoever could free his property from the supernatural presence. The amount offered was considerable, $5,000, equivalent to the price of a small ranch at the time. The announcement of the reward was published in newspapers in Austin, San Antonio, and other major cities, attracting the attention of adventurers, curious individuals, and people who considered themselves experts in paranormal phenomena. The first to accept the challenge was Colonel William Harrison, a retired military man known for his courage in battles against Apache raiders. The colonel believed that any supernatural manifestation could be intimidated by an adequate demonstration of force and authority. He arrived at the ranch accompanied by 2 soldiers and an impressive arsenal of weapons. His plan was simple. He would remain in the house for an entire week, demonstrating that he wasn't afraid of ghosts or spirits. If there were any manifestations, he would respond with gunfire and shouts until the presence got tired and went away. On the first night, the colonel and his men installed themselves in the main parlor, armed to the teeth and determined to show superiority over any supernatural force. They played poker, drank whiskey, and made a lot of noise, as if they wanted to purposely challenge the invisible presence. The response didn't take long to arrive. Around midnight, the familiar sounds began: footsteps in the hallway, furniture being dragged, and the icy wind that swept through the entire house. But this time, the intensity of the phenomena was much greater than anything previously reported.
The military men's weapons began firing by themselves, one after another, completely empty in their cartridges. The bullets buried themselves in the walls but seemed to be deflected by an invisible force, as if none hit the location from where the sounds came. The colonel tried to maintain composure, shouting orders to his men and challenging the presence to show itself for a fair fight. But when his own weapons turned against him, floating in the air and pointing directly at his chest, his military courage found its limits. The three men fled the house screaming, leaving behind all weapons and equipment. The colonel, who had faced the most dangerous Apache warriors without showing fear, left the ranch that same day, swearing never to return to that cursed place. The second candidate was Professor Edmund Clark, an intellectual from Austin, who considered himself an expert in psychic phenomena. He had studied similar cases in foreign books and believed he could solve the mystery through scientific methods and systematic observation. Professor Clark arrived at the ranch loaded with equipment he considered modern for the time: thermometers, barometers, a camera, and several notebooks for detailed annotations. During the day, Professor Clark made detailed measurements of the house, noting temperature, humidity, air currents, and any physical anomaly he could find. At night, he installed himself in the main parlor with all his instruments, ready for a rigorous scientific analysis of the supernatural manifestations. He had theories about magnetic fields, atmospheric pressure variations, and even gases emanating from the soil that could cause collective hallucinations. But when the phenomena began, all of Professor Clark's instruments began functioning erratically. The thermometers marked impossible temperatures, oscillating between extreme values in a matter of seconds. The barometers indicated atmospheric pressures that didn't exist in the region. His camera fired by itself, wasting all the plates without capturing anything beyond strange blurs. The worst moment came when Professor Clark tried to communicate directly with the presence, asking questions out loud and waiting for responses he could document. The presence responded in a way the intellectual had never predicted. It began writing on the house walls. Words gradually appeared on the adobe walls, as if written by an invisible finger. But they weren't words in English or any language the professor knew. They were strange symbols, drawings that looked like maps or diagrams, numbers that followed no known mathematical logic. When he tried to copy the symbols in his notebooks, Professor Clark discovered that his hands refused to obey. Every time he brought the pencil close to the paper, an invisible force deflected his hand, preventing him from recording what he saw, as if the presence didn't want its messages to be documented or taken outside the house. The situation became even more disturbing when the presence began showing him mental images, clear visions of past events, as if they were someone else's memories. He saw men digging in the house's backyard during a stormy night, burying something heavy wrapped in dark cloths. He saw violent arguments, screams of rage and desperation. He saw blood being spilled on the red Texas earth. He saw secrets being taken to the grave along with a man who died without being able to reveal the truth. When dawn broke, Professor Clark was in a state of shock. His scientific worldview had been completely shaken by experiences he couldn't explain through any known theory. His precise instruments had proven useless before forces that transcended conventional physical laws. He abandoned the ranch that same day, taking behind only the clothes on his back. He left behind all equipment as if he wanted to completely forget the experience. Some say he never returned to research in paranormal phenomena, dedicating the rest of his career to studying botany, a safer and more predictable science.
After these consecutive failures, the haunted house's reputation was definitively consolidated. People in the region began completely avoiding the area, and even the bravest cowboys refused to herd cattle near the abandoned structure. Samuel began considering the possibility of demolishing the house and building something new on the site. But Grandmother Esperanza warned him that this could anger the presence even more, as destroying its last connection to the physical world could make it even more powerful and dangerous. It was during this time that news arrived about a man different from all others who had tried to solve the mystery. He wasn't military, nor intellectual, nor a healer. He was simply a traveler who walked through Texas on foot, carrying only a small bundle and a Franciscan cord tied around his waist. The man was called Brother Francis of the Cross, although he wasn't officially a religious. He had adopted this name during his wanderings through the frontier towns, where he had gained fame as a holy person, capable of healing diseases, resolving family conflicts, and bringing peace to places tormented by restless spirits. Brother Francis was a middle-aged man, thin like the ascetics who spend long periods fasting, with graying hair and beard that never seemed to grow beyond a specific length. His eyes were clear, serene, like those of someone who had found deep inner peace. His clothes were simple, patched in several places, but always clean. What most attracted attention about Brother Francis was his Franciscan cord. It wasn't a common cord, but a thick hemp rope with 3 specific knots that symbolized the Franciscan vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. The cord had been blessed at the mission San Antonio de Padua, at the tomb of Father Junipero Serra, and carried palpable spiritual energy. When he learned of the haunted house's existence, Brother Francis showed no interest in the reward offered by Samuel. He said only that he felt called to help, that he had received a sign during his prayers that he should go to that specific place. Samuel, already skeptical after so many failures, received Brother Francis with politeness, but without great expectations. He offered him lodging in the main ranch house, food, and anything he might need. But the traveler asked only for fresh water and permission to spend one night alone in the haunted house. In the afternoon preceding his vigil, Brother Francis spent hours in prayer beside the haunted house. He performed no elaborate ritual, lit no special candles, spread no salt or herbs. He simply knelt in the yard under the scorching Texas sun and remained motionless for hours, with hands clasped and lips moving in silent prayers. At nightfall, he entered the house carrying only his Franciscan cord and a small image of Saint Joseph that he always carried with him. He needed no lanterns or candles, as the light of the moon shining that night was sufficient to illuminate the rooms through the open windows. Samuel and his cowboys positioned themselves at a respectful distance from the house, curious to see what would happen with this candidate. Some bet that Brother Francis would run away before midnight, like all the others. Others, impressed by his serenity, had a discreet hope that perhaps he could achieve something different. During the first hours of the night, nothing happened. The house remained silent, and Brother Francis was neither seen nor heard. Some of the observers began to doze, relaxing their vigilance upon perceiving that the night seemed calm. But when midnight approached, the atmosphere changed completely. The temperature plummeted, as had happened other times, and a strange wind began to blow exclusively around the house, without affecting any other ranch structure. It was then that they heard something never reported before, the sound of a calm and respectful conversation coming from inside the house. Brother Francis spoke in low tones, measured, as if he were conversing with an old friend. And for the first time, they could distinctly hear the other presence's responses. The spirit's voice was deep, loaded with ancient sadness, but no longer threatening. It seemed like the voice of someone who had finally found someone willing to truly listen to him. The words were clear, in archaic English, but perfectly understandable. "I have waited so many years guarding what isn't mine, but that cannot be lost forever." Brother Francis responded with words of understanding and compassion. "Tell me your story, brother. Tell me what binds you to this world and what we can do to give you peace." The conversation extended for hours. Gradually, the presence told its story. It had been, in life, a man named Joshua Parker,
foreman of a neighboring ranch during the 1850s. He was known for his honesty and dedication to work, qualities that ended up leading to his disgrace. Joshua had discovered that his boss, a corrupt and greedy rancher, was embezzling money destined for the ranch workers. Not only were salaries being stolen, but also government funds sent to help the region during the periodic droughts that plagued Texas. When he confronted the boss with the evidence he had gathered, Joshua was killed in an ambush. His murderers buried along with his body a chest containing all the stolen gold coins so it would never be found and the crime never discovered. But Joshua couldn't find peace after death. His conscience kept him tied to the physical world, obliged to guard the treasure until it could be returned to its legitimate owners, the families of workers who had been robbed for years of exploitation. Joshua's spirit wandered through Texas for decades, looking for a place where he could manifest with enough force to tell his story. When Samuel built the house on the ranch, over the exact spot where the chest was buried, Joshua finally found an anchor point in the physical world. But all who had tried to exorcise the house had arrived with methods based on force, fear, or scientific curiosity. None had demonstrated genuine compassion or interest in hearing what the spirit had to say. Only Brother Francis arrived with an open heart, willing to serve divine justice. The treasure is buried under the oak tree that grows in the backyard, 3 feet deep, wrapped in cured cowhide. There are more than 5,000 gold coins, all stolen from the poor during years of drought and suffering. Brother Francis asked what should be done with the treasure. Joshua's answer was clear. The gold should be distributed among the most needy families in the region, especially widows, orphans, and elderly workers who had no way to support themselves. But there was a specific condition. The distribution should be done through a person of proven faith, someone who wouldn't be tempted to keep part of the treasure for himself. Joshua had observed Brother Francis throughout his life of renunciation and charity and knew he was the right person for this mission. "But how will I know that you'll find peace after the treasure's discovery?" asked Brother Francis. Joshua's answer was touching. "When the last coin is delivered to the last needy person, I'll feel that my mission is complete. I'll finally be able to rest, knowing that justice has been done and that the robbed have been compensated." Brother Francis agreed to fulfill the mission, but made a demand of his own. He wanted Joshua to allow him to use his Franciscan cord to temporarily capture his spiritual essence, ensuring that no other evil spirit could interfere in the treasure recovery process. Joshua agreed immediately. He said he completely trusted Brother Francis and that it would be an honor to be protected by the blessed cord of a holy man. The capture wouldn't be a prison, but a spiritual partnership until justice was completely restored. The process was surprisingly simple. Brother Francis held his Franciscan cord with both hands, recited some prayers in Latin, then extended it toward the place where he felt Joshua's presence most intensely. A golden and soft light emanated from the cord, enveloping the entire main parlor of the house. Joshua's presence was gradually concentrating, becoming visible as a translucent silhouette of a middle-aged man dressed in simple cowboy clothes from the past century. Joshua smiled at Brother Francis, a smile of gratitude and relief that carried decades of suffering finally coming to an end. He extended his spectral hands toward the cord, which began to glow even more intensely. Gradually, the spirit's figure was absorbed by the Franciscan rope, not as a prison, but as a protective embrace.
When the process was completed, the cord had slightly changed color, acquiring an almost imperceptible golden tone. Brother Francis felt a warm presence near his heart, as if Joshua were walking beside him, patiently awaiting the moment of his definitive liberation. Outside the house, Samuel and his men witnessed something extraordinary.
The house, which for months had emanated an aura of fear and unease, suddenly became peaceful. The strange wind ceased, the temperature returned to normal, and a sensation of peace descended upon the entire area. When Brother Francis left the house, carrying his cord that now glowed subtly in the darkness, everyone realized that something fundamental had changed. There was no longer the spiritual oppression that characterized the place. The house was finally free of its active haunting. "The spirit agreed to come with me," Brother Francis explained to Samuel, "but there's a condition that needs to be fulfilled. There's a treasure buried in this house's backyard, money stolen from poor workers many decades ago. We need to recover it and return it to the needy." Samuel, impressed with the evident transformation of the environment, didn't hesitate to agree. He ordered his men to bring shovels and picks, and even in the middle of the night they headed to the oak tree indicated by Joshua through Brother Francis. The excavation quickly revealed the veracity of the spirit's information. 3 feet deep, exactly as described, they found a large bundle of cured leather, preserved by the dry Texas earth. When they opened the bundle, the torchlight revealed a spectacle that left everyone speechless. Hundreds of gold coins gleamed like small suns, reflecting the flames and creating a hypnotizing play of lights. They were coins of different eras and values, some American, others Spanish, all of pure gold. Samuel wanted to count the treasure immediately, but Brother Francis stopped him. He explained that according to Joshua, there were exactly 5,300 coins, and that each one represented the sweat and suffering of exploited workers many decades ago. They shouldn't be counted as wealth, but respected as instruments of justice. "How will we make the distribution?" asked Samuel, genuinely interested in fulfilling the agreement made with the spirit. Brother Francis already had a detailed plan, inspired by the information Joshua had transmitted to him during their spiritual conversation. They would make a list of all needy families within a 50-mile radius of the ranch, prioritizing widows with small children, elderly and sick workers, and people who had lost everything during recent droughts. The distribution would be done gradually, over several months, so as not to arouse greed or violence. Each family would receive enough to buy small lands, tools, seeds for planting, and food reserves to survive the next droughts. Samuel, touched by Joshua's story and Brother Francis's dedication, offered to actively help in the mission. He made available trusted cowboys to accompany the friar on his distribution trips, ensuring protection against possible bandits who might try to steal the treasure. But Brother Francis declined the escort offer. He explained that Joshua had been very clear about how the distribution should be done, with humility, simplicity, and trust in divine protection. The presence of armed men could frighten the needy and give a military character to the charity mission. During the following months, Brother Francis traveled throughout West Texas, seeking the most needy families. He always carried a small leather pouch with a few coins, never showing the total amount of the treasure to avoid temptations or dangers. His arrival at each settlement or isolated ranch was always cause of joy. People recognized from afar the thin figure of the holy man, with his golden cord glowing softly in the Texas sun. They knew that where Brother Francis arrived, divine providence arrived with him. Each delivery always followed the same ritual. Brother Francis conversed extensively with each family, listening to their specific needs, their dreams, and their difficulties. He didn't simply deliver the coins, but guided them on how to use them in the best way, suggesting investments in land, tools, or education for the children. Each delivery was accompanied by a special prayer, during which Brother Francis felt Joshua's presence manifest through the cord. The Spirit seemed to find peace with each coin delivered, as if a part of his guilt and anguish were being gradually dissolved. One of the most touching deliveries was made to Mary Elizabeth, widow of a cowboy who had died trampled by a bull. She lived in a small adobe house with 5 small children, surviving on neighbors' charity and occasional sewing work. When Brother Francis delivered her 50 gold coins, enough to buy a small property and guarantee her children's future, Mary Elizabeth began to cry. They weren't tears of sadness, but of gratitude so deep it couldn't be contained in words. "How can I thank such kindness?" she asked, holding the coins with trembling hands. "Don't thank me," Brother Francis replied. "Thank a man named Joshua Parker, who even after death didn't rest until he could do justice. These coins are the fruit of his love for the needy." During this specific delivery, the Franciscan cord glowed more intensely than ever, and Brother Francis felt deep emotion emanating from Joshua's presence. It was as if the Spirit were reliving the joy he felt in life when helping the needy. Another memorable delivery was made to old Manuel Vaquero, a worker of more than 70 years who had lost his sight due to excessive work under the strong sun. He lived in a miserable shack, depending on neighbors' goodwill to survive. Brother Francis delivered him 100 coins, enough to guarantee his comfort for the rest of his life. But the most important was the conversation they had, during which Manuel revealed that he had known Joshua Parker personally decades earlier. "Joshua was a good man," said the old man with a voice choked with emotion. "Always defended workers against unjust bosses. When he disappeared, many of us were left orphaned of protection. It's good to know that even after death, he continues caring for the poor." At that moment, Brother Francis felt a special vibration in the cord, as if Joshua were being recognized and honored by someone who had known his goodness in life. It was confirmation that they were on the right path. Months passed, and gradually the treasure was being distributed. Each delivery brought visible transformation to the region. Families that lived in extreme poverty could buy lands and start small plantations. Children who had never attended school could pay private teachers. Elderly and sick could buy medicines and medical care. But most important was the spiritual transformation that accompanied each delivery. People didn't receive just gold, but also hope, dignity, and the sensation that they hadn't been forgotten by divine providence. Brother Francis noticed that with each delivery, his connection with Joshua became more tenuous. The Franciscan cord still maintained its golden glow, but the spiritual presence seemed to be preparing for definitive departure. The penultimate delivery was made to a family of migrants who had arrived in the region fleeing drought in neighboring states. There were 10 people, including 6 small children, living under a tattered tarp on the banks of an almost dry pond. Brother Francis delivered them the remaining coins, except for one single one he kept for the end. The family cried with joy, but what most moved the friar was seeing that they immediately began making plans to help other families in similar situations. "This money came from goodness," said the family's father. "We need to make sure it continues spreading goodness." It was exactly this mentality that Joshua hoped to awaken with his posthumous generosity. The last coin was delivered in a special situation. Brother Francis had kept a single gold coin to deliver in the most significant place possible, the tomb of Father Junipero Serra at Mission San Antonio de Padua, where his cord had been blessed. The journey to the mission was long, but Brother Francis knew it was necessary. Throughout the entire trip, he felt Joshua's presence more intense than ever, as if the Spirit were anxious to completely complete his mission.
Upon arriving at Father Serra's tomb, Brother Francis knelt and placed the last coin on the tombstone. He made a special prayer, thanking Joshua for his dedication to the poor and asking that he finally find the eternal peace he deserved.
It was then that something extraordinary happened. The Franciscan cord began to glow with an intensity never seen before, illuminating the entire area around the tomb. A translucent figure materialized beside Brother Francis. It was Joshua, but now his face radiated absolute peace and serenity. "Thank you, brother," said Joshua, with a voice that seemed to come from very far away. "My mission is complete. All the robbed families have been compensated. All injustices have been repaired. I can depart in peace." Brother Francis felt deep emotion seeing Joshua's transformation. He was no longer the anguished and desperate spirit that he had encountered in the haunted house, but a soul in a state of grace, ready to find its eternal rest. "Go in peace, Joshua," Brother Francis replied. "Your goodness will be remembered by all the families you helped, and your example will inspire other people to practice charity." Joshua smiled one last time, raised his hands in a gesture of blessing, and gradually faded away like a golden mist that dissolves at the touch of the first sun rays. The Franciscan cord returned to its original color, but maintained a special aura of sanctity. Brother Francis remained kneeling for hours, praying for Joshua's soul and giving thanks for having been chosen as an instrument of divine justice. When he finally got up, he knew he had lived one of the most important experiences of his life. The news of the treasure's complete distribution spread rapidly throughout Texas. But it wasn't just the gold coins that marked the region. Joshua Parker's story became an inspiring legend, an example of how goodness can transcend even death. Samuel, who had followed the entire process from a distance, was deeply impressed with the transformation he witnessed. The ranch house, previously feared and avoided, became a place of peace. Many people began visiting it not out of morbid curiosity, but as a place of reflection on justice and charity. The rancher decided to transform the old haunted house into a center for helping the needy. He built a small school beside it where poor children could study for free. He also installed a basic medical care post where needy families in the region could receive health care. Brother Francis remained in the region for a few months more, helping Samuel organize these charity works. But his wandering nature soon called him to continue his mission in other lands, helping other needy people throughout the frontier. Before departing, he made sure to visit one last time the house where he had encountered Joshua. The place was completely transformed. Children played in the yard where there had been only fear and desolation. The sound of laughter and happy conversations had replaced the supernatural moans and laments. In the backyard, where the treasure had been buried, Samuel had planted a garden. The oak tree that had indicated the chest's location now provided shade to a bench where people sat to talk and rest. It was a perfect symbol of transformation. Where once there had been buried secrets, now life and hope flourished. Brother Francis bid farewell to Samuel and all the ranch residents on a Sunday afternoon after a special mass celebrated by the local priest. The entire community gathered to thank the man who had brought peace and justice to the region. Upon departing, carrying only his small bundle and the Franciscan cord, Brother Francis took with him the certainty of a mission accomplished. But he knew that his story with Joshua Parker hadn't completely ended. The spirit had found peace, but his example would continue inspiring acts of charity for generations. Years later, when Brother Francis had already departed for other wanderings, people in the region continued telling the story of the haunted house that became a center of hope. They told about Joshua Parker, the man whom not even death prevented from practicing justice. They told about the holy traveler who knew how to listen to an anguished spirit and transform his pain into joy for hundreds of families. The legend spread throughout the American Southwest, inspiring other people to practice charity and justice. Many travelers began carrying Franciscan cords, hoping to have the same spiritual sensitivity as Brother Francis. Others dedicated themselves to seeking ancient injustices that could be repaired, even decades after being committed. The White Rock Ranch house never again was haunted, but it became haunted in a different way, haunted by the memory of goodness, by the constant presence of charity, by the spirit of justice that Joshua and Brother Francis had planted in that place. Today, more than 100 years later, the story is still told by Texans on full moon nights. It's a story that teaches us that not all spirits that haunt the living are malignant. Sometimes they are just good souls who haven't found rest because they still have love to give, justice to do, goodness to spread throughout the world. And who knows, on the quietest nights in Texas, when the wind blows gently among the mesquite trees and the moon bathes the adobe houses in silver, it's still possible to feel the serene presence of Joshua Parker, no longer as a restless spirit, but as a guardian angel of the needy, eternally watching over those who need help and protection. This is the true story of the haunted house of Texas, where a rancher offered a reward, where many tried and failed, but where a simple man, armed only with faith and a Franciscan cord, managed not only to capture a ghost, but to liberate a soul and discover a treasure that enriched not just a few, but an entire region of the American Southwest. A story that teaches us that sometimes the greatest wealth isn't buried in the earth, but kept in the hearts of those who dedicate their lives to serving others, even when that dedication extends beyond their own death.